Okay, hello everyone. Thank you again for coming to the Artistic and Scholarly Sessions titled The Liberal Arts in the 21st Century, Spotlight on Collaborative Engagement. If you didn't know, the format we have chosen today is called a lightning talk, which is a short, engaging presentation with faculty, staff, and student participation. We will now hear from Tim Reardanz and Matthew Damschroder about LGBTQ plus identity at IWU, measuring and enhancing a climate of inclusion.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. So we want to start talking about the climate here at Illinois Wesleyan. And so before we start that, it's important to talk about what climate here at Illinois Wesleyan is and in general what that means. So someone that, as we were doing this survey and we were working on everything that's kind of happened over the last 3 years, Susan Rankin was a name that kept popping up in the literature. And so I think it's really important that we use her definition of what climate is. And so Susan Rankin defined campus climate as the cumulative attitudes, behaviors, and standards of employees and students concerning access for, inclusion of, and level of respect for individual and group needs, abilities, and potential. So that's kind of a lot of words. So I'm going to boil it down a little bit. So I'm sure all of you know there are different cultures and subcultures within Illinois Wesleyan University. I like to think of climate as the cultures interacting with one another. So a little bit about this project. In 2013, Matthew and I embarked on this campus climate survey that was a part of my position as a first-year resident advisor. So if you told me that in 3 years when I started this project, I would be here presenting on it and looking at all the great change that happened at Illinois Wesleyan, I wouldn't have believed you. That wasn't the goal of this. To be real, this was a way to get $25 more per paycheck as a first-year resident. So it's great to see that from that we've seen all this great change, but it wasn't necessarily what was behind it. But the more I got involved in this, the more I recognized that there needed to be change on campus. So I approached Matthew with an idea to complete a climate survey around the perceptions of the LGBT community here on campus. And part of the reason for that was I had always had great experiences as an openly gay male on campus. But I heard rumors and from my peers that that wasn't necessarily the case. And so I want to know what really is the culture here on IWU's campus as far as that goes. This was an important step in the process, starting with climate, talking about what it means, because there hadn't been a survey done about perceptions of LGBT community on Illinois Wesleyan's campus before. So this was really setting that baseline to figure out what we needed to do as a campus to make it better. So developing a methodology. Now remember, I was a sophomore here at Illinois Wesleyan. The time the online survey actually went out, I was taking my first statistics course in econ. I was in no place to be doing data analysis at this level. And so thankfully Matthew stepped up and he really took that time to help me and help teach me what it all means. And so I really worked on the survey creation. I looked at what other institutions had been doing. I saw surveys they had used. I looked to help find the kind of balance. So we used primarily quantitative data, but we also recognize that that doesn't get to everything. And so we had to find that mix with qualitative data that we could use. And so Matthew got to walk me through this process of here's how you code results. Here's how we look at this. And so for me, it was a really educational experience and helped me kind of develop what methodology looks like as I go into higher education and student affairs in my future and kind of complete reports like this. So some outcomes and opportunities. Obviously, this was a collaboration between Matthew and myself. We were doing all of this, and it was a great experience for me, but it was oh so much more than that. A lot of the qualitative data really reflects what we see in the literature. LGBT, or more specifically LGB respondents, felt that the campus climate was less safe or less inclusive than heterosexual peers or cisgender peers did. But there were a lot of unique things we found throughout this. For example, 46% of respondents didn't know an LGBT faculty or staff member. I would like to think that our faculty and staff are great role models, and it's so important that we have representation. So that was something. We wanted to talk about safety and security on campus for LGBT people. 11% reported an unwelcoming climate in general, primarily because of jokes and verbal harassment that they've heard. And then people who did respond that they feared for their safety, 80% of the respondents were LGBT. We also noticed in the data that if a person had multiple marginalized identities, they fared worse on campus as far as harassment and all of that. We also noticed that as a whole, heterosexual and cisgender peers recognized that on campus, it's worse for trans and bi folks than it is for gay and lesbian folks. And so that was really important that we recognize that. We also had 0 trans-identified respondents, which really made it difficult for us to talk about how our policies work, and really should have raised the question, and I think did raise the question, are our policies so non-inclusive that we can't have trans students on campus because they don't feel included to the point they have to leave? And we also noticed that there were resource awareness disparities. So 54% of respondents had heard of our IWU Pride Alliance group, but beyond that, students, specifically first-year students, didn't really know what that meant and didn't know what resources were on campus. And so for me, that was particularly troubling as a first-year resident advisor, knowing that our students didn't know how to get the help they needed as they were transitioning to Illinois Wesleyan's campus with less of a community. And so I'm now going to turn it over to Matthew, and he's going to talk about some of the changes that we've seen on campus since 2013 when our report was published.
So when Tim sort of approached me with this project, it was exciting. It was exciting because we had kind of an invisible population of LGBTQ plus people on campus. We didn't know a lot about the community, and the project in some ways reflected that. Tim had no idea what he was getting into when he asked to do the survey. I think he thought it would be a quick Qualtrics and an easy $25, and it was neither of those things. And so we undertook the survey. We sort of got some great results from it that provoked us to think about what kind of change we needed to make on campus. And we're not a campus that has a ton of resources available for us to make change. And it was important that we mobilize kind of a small army of students and allies and LGBTQ plus interested people who could make changes in their own areas and help to kind of increase and provide for institutional capacity around inclusion. And we easily found willing and collaborative partners. So a staff-student collaboration turned into really what has become a campus-wide collaboration, largely fueled by students, right? And so in a number of ways, we've invited students into this conversation and to be a part of this change. And in a lot of ways, they had no idea sort of what they were signing up for when that happened. And one of those students is Avery Amerson. Avery came to us as a first-year student. I put out an ad on our Facebook page and said, I'm really looking for a student who wants to focus their work-study effort 10 hours a week around LGBTQ plus identity stuff. And I tend to be kind of a high-level sort of thinker and talker, and Avery Facebook messaged and said, I'd like to apply for this. What does it involve? And we met in the dugout, I think I remember. And it was great. And I have all these ideas, Avery, and we should talk more, and it's going to be so exciting. And he signed on, and again, I think he had no idea sort of what he was signing up for. But we would sit and we'd sort of brainstorm and look at that report and think about, well, what are the opportunities? What are the things that we might be able to change if we were to, sort of approach this person or approach that person? And we would continually evolve a list of items. And Avery took those and ran with them in ways that I think none of us anticipated that we would see. And we saw changes start to happen programmatically through policy change. We saw some changes to Safe Zone in the way that it approached students and faculty and staff and created inclusive, welcoming space on campus. And I think we opened up a dialogue with students to ask about what they needed and where they were and sort of what their hopes and aspirations were for the campus. And one of those hopes and aspirations was to create better and more counter space which is space where students can be authentically themselves, to be without pressure to sort of conform to standards and norms that don't affirm them, that don't sort of support them, that don't, I would say, embody kind of their best expectations for their own outcomes. And so Avery was instrumental in helping us to create counter spaces where students could be themselves. The Pride Alliance is one of those counter spaces. And through Pride Alliance, we began to have broader conversations about identity that extended beyond gays and lesbians, sometimes bisexuals, and thinking about transgender students who are gender non-conforming. And really, I think, opening up space where students who embodied identities privately, maybe in small groups, were able to become more public with their identities. And so where Tim and I found 0 trans respondents on campus who are willing to respond to an anonymous survey, now we have a growing population of students who openly identify as trans or gender nonconforming. And I think other students who are coming to that awareness on our campus because we've opened up that space and that dialogue and created a place of safety and affirmation for those students. And that's been, I think, a powerful outcome of a number of collaborations. We've also seen other folks across the institution step up, and it hasn't been because we've sort of coerced or cajoled or demanded those changes, right? A lot of times we've invited people into conversations and suddenly they say, you know what, yeah, we could easily adapt that to be more inclusive. You know what, that policy doesn't really make a lot of sense. We could rephrase that language. We could take this in a different direction. We could open up this space to be more welcoming to everyone. And we find kind of partners across the institution. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion included LGBTQ plus students in its written mission. That was a first for Illinois Wesleyan to sort of codify the support of LGBTQs. It meant a lot to those of us who have such identities to sort of be written into the fabric of the institution in a considerable way. We developed Lavender Grad, which was sort of a project that students and staff and faculty sort of came together to put on to recognize the achievements and the overcoming of obstacles that folks face around identity at Illinois Wesleyan and in the society. Sort of how they embody their dreams, their aspirations, success that we commit to when we bring them onto our campus. We've done a lot of policy change to create space on campus for transgender and gender nonconforming students. We've developed a rainbow floor in Pfeiffer Hall that sort of houses students in a gender-inclusive, welcoming, and comfortable space. We renovated our Shirk Center and included space where transgender athletes or people who are gender non-conforming could feel comfortable in their own skin as they engage in intercollegiate athletics and athletic expression. And we've done some things to incorporate trans and queer voices into the classroom through 2 particular speaker and performer series where we've had faculty partners who've come to our table and helped create dialogues on our campus around the ways that identity is valuably expressed in classroom projects and classroom discussions and the unpacking of our disciplines through a number of lenses, and the way that those educational experiences become enriched when we have a variety of voices at the table. And I can see a number of our partners in this room sort of celebrating this with us today. We did a presentation for faculty a couple times this semester to talk about expanded identities. A lot of us know about gays and lesbians. We're pretty comfortable with the L's and the G's, sometimes with the bisexuals. But when we start to talk about pansexuals or queer people, or we're talking about asexuals, those identities that are less familiar, less accessible, people become uncomfortable, right? And there's legitimate, I think, questions about how do we interact, how do we open up space, how do we respect and affirm? And we got to talk about how we do that in classrooms and in our cultures and in our interpersonal relationships. And I think those are valuable and enriching conversations. We've had opportunities to step into classrooms and sort of provide kind of expertise and content and guidance to classes where identity intersections make sense as they connect with the curriculum. That's been powerful. So one collaboration has led to, I think, boundless collaborations that continue to sort of move forward the mission and the values on which this institution was founded. And for me, there's no better showcase kind of the power of people and the power of students to contribute to a place and space. So, I'll leave things there.
We will now hear from student respondents Avery Amerson and Paige Bushman.
I'm Avery. My pronouns are he or they. And one of the things that I look for when I was applying to colleges is, do they have a pride group? That was just like the basic thing I was looking for. And I saw that Wesleyan had that, but Wesleyan still had a lot of other things that I was looking for that they didn't quite have. But I came here and then I got this position working for Matthew as the LGBT student coordinator, and so a lot of the things that we were kind of brainstorming about were like what would prospective students want to see, what would make it the campus more inclusive. So what we did was we expanded the Safe Zone program, and Safe Zone is our program that teaches safe practices and understanding LGBTQ plus people. And along with that, we had our first Safe Zone members reception, which reflected on improvements in newly certified Safe Zone members. Also during that first year, we developed gender-inclusive restrooms, and the all-gender restrooms provided a safe place for trans and gender non-conforming students to feel safe. As Matthew mentioned, we also developed lavender graduation, which is a ceremony for LGBTQ plus people and allies to reflect on, kind of what it means to be part of the community while still in college, and how those two things interact. We also worked with the Pride alumni community to develop the first Pride Summit. And that's a great opportunity for students to, speak with LGBTQ plus alums about what it's like to be in the workforce with that. And so those are the big things that we accomplished, and there's been other things, as Matthew mentioned, that's come after that, and so there's still a lot more to do in pay attention to that.
So yeah, I am going to just say just that. So I'm Paige Bushman. I'm the president of IWU Alliance, and I, as well as Avery, am one of the original policy writers for the Rainbow Floor, and now a resident of that space, which will be the focus of my remarks today. So in the fall of my and Avery's sophomore year, we decided to kind of move forward with attempting to establish a gender-inclusive housing space on campus, which usually started with conversations like, man, wouldn't it be cool if like gender didn't matter and we all just lived together in this like queer affirming space? Yeah, that'd be cool. Why don't we do that? And so then we did. So our goal was to secure a space to promote authenticity and affirmation of queer students beyond having an RSO and doing programming and all these other great things that were also happening by targeting the place where people spend most of their time on their floor. And so we submitted the policy, and then less than a year later, it was there. And so all of our dreams came true and everything was better. Not good, right? So we're coming to the end of our first year with the floor. We've had several bumps in the road. We're still learning how to achieve a balance between making residents feel safe and comfortable while also promoting the space to non-community members. Funny enough, the Argus just published an article today on the increasing security on the floor, referring to the locks which were put on the bathroom after several individuals expressed discomfort with non-community members taking advantage of the space. There was the mural defacement that took place last semester, and while these incidents have been few, they have also been noticed, and they do send a message. And that message is what I take away from most of our movements towards equality, which is that we're trying, but we're certainly not done yet. It's clear that the establishment of this floor won't change the hearts and minds of the campus, we have a lot of work to do in creating a culture where queer people don't face daily microaggressions, and there's no easy solution there. There's also work to be done on the policy of the Random Floor itself to be more inclusive than it already is, and the point in all of this is to say that no matter where we look, we must say this is good, but we can do better, and we will. I know from personal experience what it's like to be alienated on this campus. I've had to stand up for myself and other queer people many times, especially this past year, only to be faced with more ignorance, some unwillingness to accept people for who they are, etc. And I've been reminded in impactful ways that I am a minority and that I look at things differently from other students here. But on the other hand, I've also seen that there are amazingly affirming spaces, people, and programming done here that aim to send a message that I am wanted, that I am needed, and those things make coming here and continuing to be here worth it. And also, in addition to those things, the opportunity to be an advocate for change. And so I'm really sad to see Matthew leave his position because he has been instrumental to the forward movement of the LGBTQ+ issues on campus. But I know that Brandon Common and hopefully all the administrative personnel after them will continue to see how important these issues are on campus. And I hope that we as a community can capitalize on the good things and engage in conversations that expel ignorance so that years from now we can look back on the problems here and say, you know, look how far we come, but also perhaps how far we still have to go as we always will.
We now have time for any audience questions.
I'm just curious, do you guys, are you planning on any kind of intro courses for new students to learn about these terms that they might not be familiar with, like pansexual and any of those things? Because I know personally, I just started learning about that 2 years ago, and I'm a lesbian, and I'm like, what are these things? So it'd be really good for incoming students, especially because I remember my experience at Wesleyan, most of the people in my nursing class were from small towns, and they just don't have access to those terms. At least they didn't. So what are you guys looking at in the future to address those issues?
So I think one program we have on campus is Safe Zone, and we've continued to rework that so that we're engaging students. And so Safe Zone, while I think can be better advertised for incoming students, I think we've done a lot better with it. So during Mission Day, which is at the end of the Titan orientation, that is one of the options that students can serve and go to that. And so I know that for some students, they came in and Matthew and I were presenting, and that was the first time someone had heard those terms. And so we offer that throughout the semester and throughout the year, but I think like getting more students in that first time while they're entering the community and learning our culture is definitely something that we should strive for.
It might make a great gateway if there are any faculty partners that would like to do that. And if you look at sort of research, lesbian and gay studies, sort of minors are growing fast and could be a great curricular innovation, but I don't really have anything. Just saying.
Well, about 2 years ago, the Women's Studies program became Women's and Gender Studies with the idea of being able to provide more inclusive.
My question's for Avery. As your gateway instructor, I failed to ask you your pronoun or know you as an individual. What could I or my faculty and staff colleagues have done differently to make your gateway experience bigger?
I think a really good thing for everybody to do is just say their pronouns, because then it normalizes it. Even if you are cisgender, I think that just makes it easier for anybody who's not cisgender to not feel so awkward when you're saying it. That's a good thing.
Would you do that on the first day of class?
Yeah, I mean, we at Pride, we do that at the start of every meeting. That's just, I mean, also because you have to consider people who may be gender fluid or some other identity who may use pronouns one.
As you're going along, I was going to ask, could you give us an example of how we might do that? Because I am not used to talking about pronouns when I start a class. So could you give us an example of how we could do that?
So what we do in Pride is we'll just go around in a circle and we'll say our name and then your gender pronoun, and we just define that as how you want to be called when people are referring to you. So, I mean, for me, he or they, and somebody else, they might only want you to use their name or anything else.
I think a way that you can do that is by offering up your own. That's usually you got to do yours first so that people feel comfortable. And so maybe even when you're doing roll call, you could normalize by saying like, oh, I would like to know, what are your gender pronouns as well? Like, am I saying your name right? And is this, what are your pronouns? Because I think I know a lot of teachers who do that. So I think just incorporating it into what you already do is probably the best way.
Thank you.
I think to go along with that also, there's some great work out there by his last name Spade. He has some great technique on, so for example, when you're starting your first class, don't go off the roster because the roster might not have the preferred name on it. And so there's a lot of great thought out there. And there are a lot of things that I never thought about when I was looking more into this, about how we can create those spaces for them to introduce themselves and make every student feel comfortable in that space.
Terribly kind of pedantic, like, Qualtrics question here, but so with the survey itself, was the survey a survey of all Illinois Wesleyan students, or it was a cross-campus survey? Who was the pool of respondents?
Yeah, so we had 2 surveys that technically went out. They were basically the same, but some differences if it were for faculty or staff. So the faculty and staff one went out to all faculty. I believe Matthew promoted that in other ways as well. For the student one, I know it went out through Do Not Reply at least once. We really tried to focus our efforts in going out through specific groups. So we had IWU Pride Alliance send it out to their members a couple times and tried to reach those target groups that we think would be most willing to fill that out.
We had about 270 student respondents. We have 88 faculty and staff respondents.
Great. Thanks.
In the survey, did you find a certain number of students or faculty that weren't comfortable coming out or being about their status, their gender status? Mm-hmm. Do you have the percentages?
Yes, it's a couple years out, so I don't remember that. But
I'm just curious.
So one of the interesting learnings for me, and this was sort of during the period when I was doing my own dissertation research, and I thank Carla for this. I think the first report that I sort of shared with Carla was about 89 pages of sort of statistical data, kind of dense stuff, and she said, you know what? I don't really think a lot of people on campus are going to read that and unpack that. Take another stab at that. And I did. I got back to her with, I tried to get just the essentials in 65 pages.
I was on his dissertation committee, and it was 400 pages. So
eventually we pared it down to about 8 or 10. Now all 4 versions of that are available on the website, IWU.edu/LGBT, if you want to see that. But yes, there are a number of people still to this day who feel like they're not comfortable being out on our campus, whether they're students, faculty, or staff. And some of that is just sort of culture and generation and age and the history of our campus, where people were sometimes denied tenure or otherwise not promoted because perceptions around sexual orientation. And so those kinds of things have legs, right, that last, and people may be uncomfortable in a lot of ways based on their experiences here. I don't think that reflects today. But yeah, I think there are people on campus who haven't come out for those reasons.
I was just going to say that one of the other things that's been made available, we have a website that lists faculty and staff, LGBTQ faculty and staff members and advocates. But the list of faculty and staff is really a fraction of those who are. But in some cases, I mean, I'm even thinking in one case where the limitation isn't our campus, but it's actually the fear of a spouse off campus and what the implications would be. Mm-hmm. And so we've got some opportunities to I think be leaders in our community and help more broadly.
Was there anything surprising in the original baseline survey?
Surprising for me, I mean, to hear that like 46% of students don't know a gay or lesbian staff, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty out there. So that was shocking to me. So I just tried to gay it up a little. Right, you know?
I would say the most surprising thing for me was that our first years didn't know the resources that I thought were so out there, and as an RA, that I thought I was giving those residents. And so I think that was definitely something that we continue to struggle with that surprised me.
It didn't necessarily surprise me that there were no trans people who responded to the survey. What has surprised me is the way in the last 3 or 4 years that our population of transgender and gender non-conforming folks has just burgeoned. I mean, not to say that we have hundreds, but we've got handfuls of people who are identifying in that collective, and it's exciting to sort of have that voice on our campus and presence and sort of richness in our communities. So I'm surprised by that.
Can you talk a little bit about, in our future survey, post this climate survey, we've begun asking sexual orientation or gender identity on other surveys. And that maybe has been, for me, where the surprise is, and just sort of looking at what are those numbers looking like, particularly around the sexual assault survey that talked about bisexual, the number of students who identified as bisexual I was just surprised. I don't know what I thought it would be, but I remember it was over 10%, I think, of the respondents, or over 6%. I can't remember exactly what it was. I just remember thinking, wow, I don't know that I ever put numbers to that. But
it was surprising. In the first survey that we collected information on sexual orientation, I think we had a sort of combined percentage of gay students or lesbian identified students was around 3%, but then bisexuals matched that and asexuals exceeded it. And so it was like, wow, what does this mean? And I don't know that we've quite figured out what it means yet, other than, we have more work to do. But we've asked on our housing materials this year for the first time, sort of what sexual orientation and gender identity is, and while we haven't yet pulled that data together to sort of look at it, students were very open. I mean, there wasn't a reluctance of people to share that information. And so as we report that out in the aggregate, it will be interesting to see that. And then as we look at sort of student outcomes as it relates to sexual orientation and gender identity and whether students are experiencing cultural obstacles, it will be interesting to sort of unpack that as well.
If there are no more questions, that's all the time we have. So thank you very much.